Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal. How to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
And welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
I was recently listening to a lecture series by Richard Rohr, who both Jacqueline and I regard as an impactful spiritual teacher. And I was struck by one of his statements. And that statement is, evil people didn't kill Jesus, conventional wisdom killed Jesus. And this statement really struck a chord with both of us for a variety of reasons. And we thought we'd explore it more deeply on the show today. Why not, right? You know, what is the literal and metaphorical meaning of Rohr's statement? How has this been repeated throughout history? And really, most importantly, for this show, how might this be playing out today in the world and in our daily lives? And what is our individual and collective role in it? All this and more in the next hour. And once again, for live viewers, questions in the second half of the show. So throw them in the chat or call in at 1-800-930-2819.
Well, welcome, everybody. I think before we start, I would love it if you would let our listeners know who Richard Rohr is.
It's probably a good place to start. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan friar and a teacher. I think he's from the United States, and he's opened a place called the Center for Action and Contemplation. But he's best known for a number of books he's written, such as Breathing Underwater, Falling Upwards, and a few others. And the particular media I was consuming for this quote was he did a lecture series on Sermon on the Mount, which is available in audio, not Audible.
Mm-hmm. And what was the quote again?
Yeah, the quote was, evil people didn't kill Jesus. Conventional wisdom killed Jesus.
So I remember when you read that quote.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I remember multiple times that you read that quote. But this time it had such a profound impact on you that we talked about it for a good long time. You wrote a blog about it. And I wonder if you can share with our listeners why it was so significant for you.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's one of those things, like I'm sure I've heard him say it before or listened to him say it before, and it just washed right over me. But for something about just where I am right now and, what's going on in the world and my own life, it just really landed with me. And I just all of a sudden had this image or this realization that, in the classical story of Jesus, in my mind, I had like the bad Romans and the bad Pharisees got him, and that was sort of the end of the story. And maybe it's because we just finished watching The Chosen on TV, that all of a sudden it popped into my head. It's like, that's not really what happened at all. Actually, they were the, perhaps the actors that were pulling some of the levers, but it was the crowd. It was the people of the area. It was much, much more than that, than these people that I had sort of othered and said, well, if those bad people, the rest is good. And that's not how it played out. And it really got me thinking in terms of just, well, how does this relate to my life and everything in it? And it just really got me thinking this concept that showed up to me that changed my perception of things is that, evil people commit acts of evil. Absolutely, undoubtedly. And I think when we look back at history, we tend to think, oh, there's that evil person in this act of evil, and we move on. But as I sat with it, this metaphor, I just came to the realization that's just not how history has played out at all. It has been this idea of conventional wisdom. It has been the crowd that has committed the darkest evils, the greatest genocides, the biggest atrocities, total war. It's all been done under the guise of a general or conventional wisdom or general consensus that had gone along with this. So this evil we're talking about, it's not localized to a few bad people. It's transpersonal in a way. And the mechanism of that and how it's playing out, how it's played out in the world and how it's playing out now really began to fascinate me.
So before we delve too deeply into this, I want to challenge you
Yeah.
because I disagree with you in
Okay,
part,
good.
which is that I don't believe that there are evil people that commit evil acts. I think there are people who are driven by fear, who have their shadows have taken over completely, and fear drives evil acts. But I'm not sure I buy that there are evil people who do evil things.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I think that's a great way to frame it. And perhaps I said fearful people commit acts. Let me ask you this, are there evil acts?
I think that there are evil acts, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think fearful people are committing what we see as evil acts. And unfortunately, we gather together in the way that you were speaking in terms of a collective to shove those people into corners and to highlight their evilness in comparison to what we deem as good, because we're unwilling to look at our own shadows.
Mm-hmm.
I watch you as an example who has taken a really good hard look at his shadow. And when people come to you who the rest of the world, the collective, might deem evil, you actually see them with absolute compassion because you've embraced your own shadow. So I think it's really important for us to be able to delineate between evil acts and evil people. Because societally, what we look at, we look at bullies and we attack bullies. Well, research shows that people only bully because they're hurt and afraid and angry. And we gather together and we make them bad instead of helping them. And so I just want to make sure that this is the line that we're going down. Now, as we do that, I want to come back to what you were saying about collective wisdom, not collective wisdom, conventional wisdom, or conventional, not wisdom. What would you call it?
Conventional wisdom?
I don't know.
Consensus thinking?
Consensus thinking, because
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
wisdom and conventional,
Right.
I don't think they go together. I watched you a
Fair
couple
enough.
of years ago go really deep into Paul Levy's work around Wetiko. And I think it might be really interesting for you to let our listeners know where that comes from, what that's about. How do you
Okay.
feel about that?
I printed a quote from Paul Levy, which I'll read because he describes it, Wetiko, beautifully. But I'm really struck. We've just taken a level deeper in this conversation that's just showing up to me. Is even in my presentation of it, I went into this dualistic thinking of, good people, evil people, and this is the idea that doesn't exist. It's something else that's happening that's creating these acts that are destructive or not destructive without labeling.
And, we've looked at Richard Rohr's work, and both of us have also looked at Joel Goldsmith's work. And Joel Goldsmith will really talk about the fact that there's no such thing as evil. The only thing evil is an error of the mind
Right.
that bought into duality in the first place. So, yeah.
Okay. So Wetiko is a Native American concept of a seemingly malignant spirit that is known by many other names in many other traditions. It is a psychological force within the unconscious mind that predisposes us towards unwholesome impulses such as the thirst for power and control, greed, and jealousy. It can manifest itself in selfishness and lack of empathy. And in a materialistic culture such as the US, where there's a deep denial of the non local quality of consciousness, we often get blindsided by it. It feeds off of polarization, fear, and the terror of others. It cripples our evolutionary potential and has a vampire-like spirit that will take energy from its own for its own profit without giving anything of value back. It's like a collective nightmare whose roots are found in the human psyche.
So we take that And does that not really define a culture being driven by its shadow?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a mind virus, basically what he's just describing. And it's like someone else describes it as a mass formation psychosis that can be driven by uh, uh, a collective that's in some type of anxiety or fear. That's then from that place, it's easily steered towards an outcome.
Hmm. So, in recent history, I mean, I'm kind of leading you in
Right.
terms of my question
Right.
because I
Right.
feel like COVID actually was a really great example of how this kind of thinking took over.
Yeah. I and I want to jump to COVID, but I want to take one more step before we get to COVID,
Okay.
because COVID's so provocative for a lot of people. And it's I think in this topic where it really stands out to me as an obvious one is one we're all familiar with is Nazi Germany, right? And I wrote about this. There's this very famous picture, and I mean 90% of people seen it, and it's at a Hitler rally, and everyone's got their hands up and salute and cheering and screaming. You can feel the energy in the picture, like these guys are going along with what this guy's saying. And there's one guy in the crowd. He's got his arms folded like this, and he's scowling, and he's not going along with it. And this is this perfect metaphor for the role of critical thinking or challenging in the face of what looks like mass psychosis or conventional wisdom at the time. And I think what's the interesting thing about this, they've done studies where they show this to students in university, and which one you'd be. Everyone says they're the man with their arms crossed and scowling that they wouldn't go along with. They say no, but the metaphor is complete in it. He was one out of 1,000 people in this picture that wasn't going along with it. And I'll put an exclamation mark that. I mean, I think we collectively forget this. Adolf Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year for 1938, published January 2nd, 1939. The conventional wisdom of that time, up until months before the start of the war, was he was the Man of the Year. He was the most important person in the world that was doing the right thing. That's the depths of where conventional wisdom and mass psychosis will take a society of good people, of good people.
So, what do you think it takes for that one person to stand in a crowd when we all know that belonging is one of the biggest drivers of motivates human beings in their actions, that it's essential for our survival, essentially. And yet, there's one person standing in a crowd of 1,000 who says, excuse my language, but this guy's full of shit. What does it take for that one person to do that?
My belief, I think you said it earlier. It's this idea of what's the work that allows us to move to a different place of consciousness, that we're no longer operating under a place of fear, such as the fear of not belonging or not fitting in or being wrong. That man was clearly not operating from that place, because not only was he was physically not going along with it. He was physically putting himself in danger in that crowd of like, nope, I'm going to be here with you, but I'm not going along with it. So he had transcended that consciousness of fear and anxiety and needing to fit in.
But it has to be bigger than that, because if you look through history, and I'll come back to your example of Jesus. Um, Jesus was preaching that the kingdom of heaven is here on earth, that here within our bodies we have access to divine wisdom, divine consciousness. And everyone around him, aside from those that were following him, were going after him because he was challenging the status quo. He holds a place in history that is so profound because he chose to stand up against the status quo. So do many other biblical characters through history, and yet they are so few and far between. We will naturally go with the crowd rather than stand up against it. We will find our people, we will find beliefs that we align with, and we will follow.
Yes.
What is it that differentiates the person who's willing to stand up. It's not just they've transcended something, their fear. There's something else. There's something quite, I mean, these are people that we see as mystics. And I was thinking about this. I was actually thinking about it on my run this morning because I was wondering, I know you to be one of those people. And I know it through my experience with you during COVID. And one of the things that I was really starting to question is, do you have to be brought to a place of surrender in your own life where conventional wisdom actually gets in the way, where you are left high and dry, essentially, by the world around you to tap into something that is so much more profound in terms of connection to God, connection to the universe, whatever it is you want to call it, that creates a place of courageousness within you to go against the status quo.
I think that's accurate. And I just call that consciousness, whether it's God consciousness or Jesus was, he came from a place of unconditional love. There's no fear operating within his psyche. And I think, and brought up a lot of stuff there. These heroes that we have, these mystics, it's like the Gandhis, the Martin Luther King, these other people that emulate that. We look at them and they're all people they're at the core anti-establishment. They're revolutionaries. They go against the collective wisdom at the time, and they're almost always killed for it. As well, we see them all as our heroes. We watch movies and we're always cheering for like the rebels in Star Wars, the anti-establishments. But then in our real life, the majority of people are just going to go along with whatever the collective wisdom at the time is. And as soon as one of those characters emerge, most likely jump in the bandwagon of outing them, calling them all sorts of names and pejoratives, just like they did to Jesus, for instance. Mm-hmm. I can just sort of see the headlines back in 33 AD, local carpenter spreading misinformation and, devil worshiping or something like that. You can see the headline. You can see everyone's nodding their heads and outing him as an other when he's really talking about unconditional love and saying, hey, the collective thing we've all agreed to isn't going to take you to where you're meant to go.
Well, it's interesting that I'm just thinking about what you just spoke, which is that all of the characters that you've named through history, they were huge revolutionaries, but they weren't violent. None of them were violent. All of them were appealing to people's hearts. Mm-hmm. All of them were actually, I'd actually say in a lot of ways, they were all practicing nonviolence. And yet today, if we look at what's going on in the political realm, the characters in history today are they're using violence. They're using the opposite of unconditional love to try and accrue people. And they're creating havoc.
Yes. Yeah. The non-dualistic thinkers were talking. So this is dualism. It's like you're good, I'm bad, and both sides will say the same thing, and they look to dehumanize the other side and the other side. We live in a dualistic world, and that's why I fell in the trap of calling it good and evil too at the start, because that's the way we speak about things. These others we're talking about, they're coming from a place of non-dualism, where they're coming from a place of, hey, if I'm gonna hold the place of inner peace in my heart and love of non-violence, and I'm gonna let that vibrational frequency change the world. That's not surprisingly, Jesus is probably the most famous character in history. But another great example of that is more recent is Gandhi. It took a long time, but ultimately he was impactful at liberating India, for lack of a better word, non-violently. And he did that by contemplating, meditating, communing with God, and then had this realization of the way to beat the British. And he got up and he marched down to the sea. And I'm going to butcher this story, by the way. Marched down to the sea, put his hand down and grabbed up a piece of salt. And back in India of the day, there's a tax on salt. And all he was saying is that I'm not paying the tax. And he encouraged with that frequency of courage and love and not caring what happened to himself to overthrow an entire government. non-violently, but it came from that place of I'm not afraid. It came from a place of I've got God consciousness, and whatever happens to me happens to me.
So we talk about people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Jesus and the Joan of Arcs and Teresa of Avila and other characters throughout history who really challenged the status quo. And I mean, studying them is profound work. But I'm actually more curious about something else.
Yeah.
You're looking at
I'm
me
looking
so
at you. Well, you pulled me in with that.
Well, for me, and I want you all to hear this from the standpoint of, well, I'll tell you how I want you to hear it. You'll hear it however you want to. There's my need for control
right.
coming in.
That's your shadow.
Yeah, totally.
Good awareness.
But for me, in my lifetime, you are one of those characters. Mm. And I don't say it with, well, actually, I do say it with reverence, because I have a tremendous amount of reverence for how you live your life and how you walk your talk. And I'm going to bring us back to our shadow in this, because I will never, ever forget a statement that you made, and I will butcher it and you'll correct me, I hope. But one of these, in your recovery, one of the things you had to do was go to this anger management group. Mm-hmm. And I remember you coming out of it and telling me a story. And one of the stories was something around this idea that I had to embrace the fact that I could be violent in order to recognize, in order to be aware enough not to allow that part of me to drive my actions. And my guess is that with each of these people through history, they weren't just operating from God consciousness in this way that, you know, we can't reach because it's too far out of the way that we operate in the world. They had embraced their shadows enough to be able to accept that the people that were operating around them were operating from their shadows. They could see it. They could see that people weren't evil, that people were unconscious. That's right. And that they had come to a place where they had embraced their own shadows enough to see themselves capable of all of these things that other people were doing, so that they weren't in judgment of them. They could accept them, mm-hmm. and yet operate from a different place. And I see you do that all the time. That, I think, and I didn't start the show with the idea that I knew the answer to the question, but that, I think, is what differentiates the person in the crowd who can stand with his arms crossed and say, no thanks. He's not screaming at the top of his lungs in that picture, making Hitler bad and all the people around him bad. But he's standing in the middle of that crowd going, yeah, I'm not buying into that.
Yeah. And you're right. And it's like, it is, I think I was speaking about where he's residing at versus how he got there. But I think you're absolutely right. That is the shadow work and coming into contact with your own psyche, your own hidden parts, own ability for violence and for destructive behavior. That is one of the primary pathways to higher consciousness. As Carl Jung says, there's no coming to consciousness without suffering. And so suffering is that path, or at least the path I took. I didn't volunteer for it.
But so many people in our world look at suffering and see suffering as, I am a victim to what's happening. And I'm suffering because I'm a victim. What you're speaking to, and what I know to be true in my own experience, is that the kind of suffering that we're talking about is actually the suffering that doesn't look at where we don't look at ourselves as victims, but actually where we look at ourselves and we see the aspects of our character that are persecuting, that are damning, and we find some way to be able to have those parts belong as much as the other parts of us, so that we can then operate in the world from a standpoint of compassion versus judgment.
Yeah. And I think you hit something on the head there. Like our society, like, Paul Levy talks about polarization, fear, and terror. But the other part of that is a society that has a victim blame modality on it. That as soon as there's some type of suffering shows up, instead of maybe potentially, and I'm not discounting all suffering, but instead of using that as an energy and a modality for transformation to do some shadow work or whatnot, it's far easier just to blame someone and other them and make them the bad person. My suffering or where I'm at as a result of that other person. I'm not going to look at myself. I'm going to point and look over there. And that's sort of been institutionalized in our society. And so collectively, we don't do this work. Collectively, it's much easier to get angry, join a club, point out the other guys are the bad guys and we're the good guys. And then we just keep repeating this over and over again until we have some, a civil war or a world war or something that happens that then resets us. That seems to be history.
So I'm going to say something right now that is very might make you all want to other me. I think it's more than just war that we get. We get these lines of belief that then have our culture turn in a way to harness victim mentality. I'll give you an example. I'm a therapist and I'm trained as a trauma therapist. But I have spent the last couple of years so irked, like something inside of my body is like, this isn't right. As I look at the way that the therapeutic world is now looking at trauma, because trauma has become everybody's traumatized. Every one of us is a victim to something. And the interesting piece of it is that I don't see it creating resilience. I see the line of thinking that's happening in the world creating victim mentality. And when I speak to some of the people that are in my field that I really respect, they too see that happening. And so this whole idea of suffering, I think it's really the key to a big part of this,
yes,
which is suffering is an essential piece of being a human being. But suffering is designed to bring us to a place of personal responsibility for ourselves in our lives. And essentially, it requires us to be able to find compassion for ourselves and the people around us in order for us to heal. It comes back to one of Jesus's messages, which is around forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of the most essential, if not the most essential way to step out of victimhood and into a higher consciousness. And yet we live in a society that loves to look out for the victim and doesn't really teach the resilience necessary in order to move us from that place.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Our entire legal system is effectively set up in the area of sort of retribution versus forgiveness. And, forgiveness is sort of like adjacent with unconditional love. They go together. But why don't we take a break there and we'll come back and get into it in the second half.
Sounds good.
Tired of feeling exhausted as a parent? I would love to help you with a new vision for yourself that is focused on intentional wellness parenting. My name is Aurélie Cormier, and I have over 40 years experience with complex cancer patients. I offer consultations, coaching, and educational programs for parents who want to boost their health and reduce risk of disease, especially cancer. For more information, go to AurélieCormier.com.
Are you ready to listen to your soul? Discover the power of pausing and turning in on Our Soul Whisper with Kathy Belmont and Dr. Pat. This sacred show offers a safe space for self-discovery, healing, and soulful transformation. Let your inner voice rise, be heard, and gently guided into expression. Tune in every first and third Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Subscribe now so you never miss the whisper meant just for you. Visit OurSoulWhisper.com.
You're thinking your purpose in life? Become a certified hypnotherapist and regressionist today. Bryn Blankenship is a renowned certified master hypnotherapist, international instructor, and author. In addition to her own show, Afterlife Teacher, Soul Lessons Bringing You Full Circle, Bryn is a popular radio show guest who speaks about her soul expression spiritual regression, her transformative method for finding and following your soul's guidance. For more information on her hypnoregression and afterlife regression certification programs, visit brynblankenship.com.
Festa della Donna with Esther Graham honors all women far beyond a single day of celebration. Regardless of your race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion, Esther helps you rise to your full potential to live fully in God's plan and to do what you were divinely created to do. Festa della Donna offers programs that help you fulfill your dreams and desires. For more information and to get your free copy of the Festa della Donna Retreat Self-Care Guide, visit fdbwomen.com.
Tune in to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living with me, Jacqueline.
And me, Chris, on Transformation Talk Radio, every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and to heal, and how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Witness the field of potential that arises when you take personal responsibility and become the divine creator in your own life.
Visit theway-healing.com for more information.
And we are back. I was thinking over the break about that that victim mentality from a psychotherapy standpoint, and my own experience is it was a real. I didn't spend a long time in psychotherapy, and I really did try to play a victim role when I was going through therapy, and I ended up in recovery in a relatively short order. And the interesting thing about recovery, and there's most of them are not all of them, most of them, the one I'm familiar with is a spiritual program. Mm-hmm. Counting on the fact you're damn desperate when you come in, and so you're going to take a really hard look at yourself, because if you don't, you're going to die. And in working with others and being involved in those rooms, there is no tolerance for victim mentality. It's like there's no self-pity allowed. It's like you don't get to play that game, because if we let you play that game, you're going to die, and it's life or death. So it's like the victim thing doesn't work for you. No more self-pity. And it really reflect that. You know the story I'm going to tell?
Shia LaBeouf? No.
It's like this,
because that's the one that's coming to my mind.
Okay, let me tell that. But this one is my own story. It's in the recovery center.
Oh, yeah.
very early on, like day 2 or something like that. Like we're in a small rooms group, and I'm going on about why I struggle with alcohol and drink and do all these terrible things. And this woman Susie, who's like a 60-year-old Irish woman, just stops me in my tracks and just looks at me and goes, what is that? You're 50 years old and still blaming your dead mother for your problems? Grow the fuck up. And it was just like that. And it was like one of the most profound things anyone ever said to me. And it just stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, that's not going to get me anywhere. What's going on? I just changed the way I saw everything. But anyways, that's this move from this place of what do we use our suffering for? To be a victim or to transform that into something else? And if we start transforming that shame and guilt and apathy, we move through fear, we move through desire, and we move into higher states of consciousness.
Just to give you a different example, I was really struck last week. I was working with a client who had come in. Something had happened, and she ended up with, on her right side, had a tremendous amount of noise in her ear. So much so that she couldn't hear her own voice. And it wasn't ringing. It was much bigger than that. And she's had tests upon tests upon tests to try and figure out what was going on. And she was really feeling like a victim to the discomfort. And And during our session, we were talking about purpose and how she's not clear about what her purpose is, and yet she's an artist. And because of this thing, she started using her art to try and understand her past. She started working through all of her own stuff with her family of origin. She started writing. She started doing all of these things. She all of a sudden has a child who jumped on her bandwagon and started looking at himself differently. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, you started with this noise as being something that was victimizing you. And what I'm actually seeing is you using your suffering to transform your inner world. And your purpose is becoming incredibly clear through the process.
Right.
And the naming of it sort of, it took her back because she hadn't even realized that she was doing it. Right. And I think that's this piece with suffering, which isn't actually what we started to talk about in this at all, but our suffering actually is an opportunity, if we can see it as that, to step in, to actually take personal responsibility in our lives in a profound way. And Susie brought you to that. And now you're bringing other people to that.
And in the example we're talking about today, you framed it really nicely in the first half. Is like the greatest existential fears we have is not being part of the crowd, not belonging, not being accepted. Well, that's suffering. When we say something that like it triggers other people and we get excluded and we feel judged, we suffer. And so instead of sitting with that and looking at ourselves and seeing what's going on, we might be tempted to course correct and come and be a victim to it, or come back in and change it. So we don't have to suffer. We don't have to feel that sense of alienation or not belonging.
So, I mean, I have a bunch of examples that come up for me, but I wonder if you could share with our audience, outside of the realm of the macro, which we could talk about for hours, on a micro level. How do you see this whole idea of Wetiko playing itself out? And what can we do to change it?
It's like there's the big mind viruses that lead to total war, and there's just a smaller one that this is a really simple example that a lot of religions can relate to. It's like the keeping up with the Joneses type thing. Even like, I've got to have my kids overly scheduled doing all these sports, and if they're not, I'm going to get judged. And it just leads us into all these behaviors that I think in our heart we know aren't actually that good. Like, in our heart is like, we don't know if it's the best thing that we're this busy or my family is this busy, but everybody else is doing it, so I want to go along with that. That's a minor version of what's at play here.
It's interesting. We were talking about, I didn't think about that. We were talking about that on the ski hill yesterday too, with this idea of everybody needs to buy the coat, like the name brand outfit.
Yes.
In order to be able to ski. Everybody needs to buy and have the vest and the name brand running gear in order to be out running. And yet all of that is just, we're all buying. I mean, what we're talking about on a large, I just lost my words. Wetiko actually shows up in marketing.
Marketing is Wetiko. Yeah. It's, that is the heart of it, is the recognition that all of us, our brains are so easy to hijack if we're not aware. If we're not aware, listen, if you're sitting here shaking your head, so not my brain, okay, you're being hijacked right now. It's like, the question is not how am I trying to be hijacked? How am I being hijacked right now? And can I look at it? Can I sit with it? Can I see how conditioned I am? And now can I try to make sense of it? But starting from that point that every direction, there are elements that are that are trying to control my behavior, to buy certain things, to live a certain way, to vote a certain way, to have certain beliefs, to believe a certain narrative, to think certain people are good, certain people are bad. It's coming at us nonstop. And if we're not recognizing that, we're simply at the mercy of it, and it will pull us this way and that way. And this idea of like what's our role in this is the call to action is, can we take responsibility for our own consciousness in a sense? Can we take responsibility to say, hold on a second, I'm not just going to take that at face value because the crowd's going along with it. The crowd is notoriously wrong throughout history, notoriously wrong. That's like that is even a rational belief system that the crowd's right. And particularly when I see things on the news that, wait a minute, every news station is repeating the exact same message using the same words, that should be my red flag to say, I need to question this thing. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm certainly going to say something's off here and start questioning these narratives, questioning these belief systems, and try to be more sovereign in the way I'm going to approach the world and my place in it.
So I hear you, and I find myself, I'll just use me as an example, really confused, right? In the past, when I was a kid or a young adult in school, and even an older adult in school, when my teachers said something, I thought they were speaking truth. I was never taught to question that truth. Now, when I notice what you're speaking to, which I do every day, where it leaves me is, I don't even know what's true. I don't know what's happening on the ground in X country, because there's a narrative that's being promoted through every every news station that I can find. There's that narrative, which everybody around me is buying into. And then there's another narrative that comes up, which also is fueled by its own agenda. And then you sort of sit somewhere in the middle where you say, I know this isn't true, and I know this isn't true. But how do we get to a place where truth becomes clear?
Well, to me, I've heard truth is that you don't know. And that's the truth. And it's the saying of Socrates, I know I'm the wisest man here because I know that I know nothing. It's when we think we know, that's when we're hijackable. And when we realize it's something going on halfway across the world, getting bombarded with information from both sides who both want to present a narrative that's to their advantage. And of course they would. That would make sense. Why wouldn't you? I know that I don't know the answer.
Okay, so then we come back to our original picture of the guy in Nazi Germany who's sitting with his arms like this. Everybody's buying into the narrative that Hitler's speaking. Some part of him knows that that narrative isn't truth.
Right.
So how did he get there?
He just asked, he probably recognized one that everyone's going along with it, so it's suspicious. He's probably saw the patterns of how this was setting up in terms of the media and the narrative and the angles coming at it and saying something's fishy with all this thing. And he probably started asking really simple questions about it to himself and immediately fell apart. And his role is like, yeah, he could pick up a gun and try to go fight it and that wouldn't help. That would make it worse. That would probably further support, because the narrative was probably he was one of the bad guys. It would have made him one of the enemy, which I believe was probably the communists at the time, among other people. And all he can do is find his own truth, and then I believe hold that consciousness and hope it helps other people ask questions as well, planting siege, not going along with it. You know, that's our collective, that's our individual responsibility, and hopefully it creates a collective wave. I don't know if that made any sense.
It makes perfect
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
It just leaves me in a place where I agree with you. But that consciousness, as powerful as that consciousness is, in the presence of so much power, it leaves me wondering how we can actually affect change in the world outside of just shifting our own vibration. And I suppose on some level we can't.
We can't. I think that's a conclusion. But we can and we can't at the same time. Not in the mechanical linear way of I'm going to speak out about it. I'm going to fight about it. I'm going to create a resistance. That's just more duality. That's just more, I'm going to create another side to fight this side. And it probably just strengthens that side. I think this is the teaching of Jesus, or the teaching of most spiritual teachers. The power of our consciousness is infinite. And if we can change our inner consciousness, we change the way our frequency vibrates in the world, that will ultimately have a far lasting, profound effect on the consciousness of everyone else. And just coming back to the Jesus metaphorical example, he ultimately had to die for his consciousness to reverberate around the world. But it's the largest religion in the world of people trying to follow the teachings and the way of Jesus. And he died at 33 by going inwards for the most part. He didn't raise an army to go fight whoever.
No. And I find, as I was asking the question, one of the things that I find really interesting is that when we look at Wetiko playing itself out, or we look at mass hypnosis playing itself out, one of the characteristics of it, without fail, is an inability to be compassionate towards the other side.
Yes.
And to be so attached to our story and our way of seeing the world that we don't actually end up having compassion for the people that we're fighting against.
And you do it to yourself too. Like within that, you create, because you get so convinced that you're right and and the other people are bad, it creates all this internal conflict and suffering within you as things are happening in an uncontrollable world that you can't control, that you think are wrong and bad, and suddenly you have this worldview that everything's terrible and in a constant state of anxiety and stress. So it doesn't even serve the individual who's believes they're fighting something by taking this stance.
Yeah. I'm kind of speechless right this moment. Maybe you can take us to the next place, because that's.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things you brought up earlier, and I took us off track, so I wanted to come back to that powerful Nazi Germany metaphor, is the COVID example. It's alive. I mean, it's still going on, to be honest. We haven't reconciled the whole thing. And again, this is like, going to be provocative here, because it's an unresolved issue. And there's a lot of people, particularly in my country of Canada, that still see it a very specific way that baffles me a little bit. But my own experience with it, and I think I've shared this part in the show before, is this is when I had just finished doing sort of an early round of shadow work. And COVID really starts to, the whole COVID narrative really starts to ramp up. And I'm, this is back in the days when I avidly watched the news. I don't watch the news anymore because to me, it's just narrative control. I'm watching all these different channels in Canada, and it's like they're using the same words to describe it. They're saying the same things. It's like numbers and flashing and fear and scary. But the most interesting thing was, by chance, I have a graduate degree in statistics. What I'm really good at is looking at patterns, looking at data, and making sense of it very, very quickly with very limited amount of resources. And I'm looking at the webs. I'm looking at the data on COVID because I'm interested, and I'm scared at first too. What's going on in the world? And I'm looking at it because I want to know. And I'm slowly seeing, as time goes on, that what's being spoken does not match the actual data at all. It's not even close. It's actually, the narrative's actually flipped on its head, that this is this deadly pandemic that's going to kill everybody if we don't do this, this, and this. And the data clearly showing it's like very much like, a bad version of the flu that has similar mortality. It's going after similar populations. If you're young and you're healthy, you're really not at risk for this thing. And that's not what's being promoted. And that was my real look at this is my first time I really awoke to what's going on in this world, and recognized that was just the first time I've noticed it. It's been going on my entire life, and it goes on to this day on every topic.
Well, and I think what it showed us, and we hold similar and different opinions around all of it, is what it showed us was the absolute need of those in power to control the narrative.
Yeah.
And when we go back in history and we look at all of the people that you were speaking about, there was a deep need to control the narrative against what these people were saying, because not doing so would give too much power to the collective or to the people, which would rob those in power of being able to control us.
Yeah. Yeah. And as it relates to COVID, Matt, it's like, I'm going to be clear. I don't think the people that we're doing are bad people or evil people. I imagine how it started off. I can create a very empathetic scenario for it all, because that's part of like doing shadow work, is you can see, oh, I understand where they came from. Is at the start of it, it was terrifying. It looked like who knows what this disease is going to do. People created models to model it out. Those models were catastrophic. Now, as it turns out, the data comes in, it wasn't matching the models. I can imagine the amount of fear that the policymakers had around those models. They wanted to stick with those models. Right? It makes sense. They do not, they want to protect everybody. They want to keep us safe. So they keep doubling down on the models, despite the fact that data is not supporting it. They're not bad people. In fact, they're just scared. And this takes us down to this place.
Well, and what you're speaking to in terms of the policymakers and holding on to their models is actually no different than what happens on the microcosm within each one of us, with our own ways of looking at our identities. And we will double down in order to make sure that our identity, and I would say our identity being our mask or our persona, is supported in order to continue its survival. We don't want to do the hard thing, which is to look at that and recognize that we are not our mask and we are not our persona. We are scared inside, having had to develop that mask and that persona in order to survive, in order to belong, in order to be a part of, and actually stopping and doing the work to deconstruct that is the most terrifying thing in the world. So we don't do it.
Yeah, because that thing that we call our mask or persona or our model, at least from its vantage point, it got us here. So as of today, I'm safe and alive. And what's the best thing to make sure I'm safe tomorrow? Probably just do the same thing. Probably not make a radical change. Probably not look too closely. Like, I've survived, so let's just keep rolling with what got me here versus radically change it.
But the interesting piece about what you're speaking to is that I have survived up until this point.
Yes, that is the key.
But I have not thrived.
That's right.
Yeah.
The ego is a fear-based survival model.
Yeah. And so in order to enter the world of thriving, I have to be willing to look at how I have adopted conventional wisdom in order to keep me alive.
Yes.
And I need to be able to question conventional wisdom if I am going to move out of survival and into a model of thriving.
Correct. And then in the limit, conventional wisdom will convince me to walk off a cliff at some point. Maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, but it has the potential. And so again, not only by looking at our shadow, challenging our belief systems, looking at our fears allows us to, avoid getting caught up in some of this stuff. It allows us to thrive. There's no downside to it except the fact nobody wants to do it, because nobody wants to look at the parts of them they kept hidden all this time.
So if we think about what we've learned in our own lives, or I'll ask you what you've learned in your own life, and we were to create a step-by-step process for what to do in the presence of conventional wisdom, do you have any guidelines for our listeners?
Yeah, I think a real starting point is really simply, can you take just a little time each day? So this is a start, and to journal for 15 minutes. And I'm making this up on the fly, about one thought or belief a day that you have. And just ask yourself, where does this come from? Is it true? How does it serve me? Is it adding something to my life?
And then if I take that one step further, I would say, how does it serve my belonging?
Oh, yeah, brilliant.
And what am I afraid of if I shift it slightly or begin to ask questions around it?
And that belonging's really important because it is an important survival feel. Like when you're a child, you need to belong to your family. In the past, if you got kicked out of your tribe, you died. Like it is an annihilation fear, but it's not true anymore once you become adults in this particular society, at least the Western society we're in. I can't speak for all of them. We don't need to be part of the crowd to survive anymore, but we're still conditioned by that aspect. So it's this idea, can you free yourself from it by looking at your thoughts and looking at your behaviors and say, what is it I'm doing to belong? And is it necessary?
And then I'll take us back to the metaphor that we used in our last podcast, because the truth is the caterpillar hangs out with a bunch of other caterpillars eating leaves.
Yep.
But when it's ready to move into that place of transformation, the caterpillar becomes cocooned and isolated by him or herself in order to do the hard work of unbecoming and moving into that primordial goo, to then get to the place where the caterpillar turns into the butterfly and then becomes a part of the world again. Right?
That is the metaphor. Absolutely. And it brings in that thing, no one can do it for you.
You have to do it for yourself.
Plant medicine can help. You can't do it for you. You've got to do it yourself. And all these things can help and people can guide you, but it's your own cocoon. It's your own path up the mountain, whatever analogy floats your boat, but it's an individual journey that we need to go on.
And it can be a really lonely one. And it is inevitably a scary one. But the outcome on the other side is one of freedom. And I think with that,
it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
All right.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal. How to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship in the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.